Today I'm talking about two people who went out of their way to take my airplane. They did about everything that they could to make sure that I didn't get a fair trial in a courtroom where they already had a hugely unfair advantage. They did what they could to charge me as much as possible, even if that money didn't end up in their pocket. 2 weeks ago, I put out a video about how the Wallapai tribe stole my airplane after giving me permission to land at their airport twice. The basics on that story was on a trip to visit Havasupai Falls, which is this magical 10-mile backpacking trip down to the bottom of the Grand Canyon that just has some of the most beautiful waterfalls in probably the western United States. Well, I got permission to land at the Wallapai airport, and that was just part of my travel plans to get to the trailhead before that hike started. But when I got to the bottom of the canyon, I received a phone call from the Wallapai police telling me
the tribe would like that plane to be removed off their airstrip.
So I spoke with the officer, calling and explaining the situation, and then I spoke with the vice chair of the tribal council. We worked out a resolution that ultimately I got permission the second time to leave my plane there until the pickup on Sunday, and I was even told that they would look after my plane for me.
Right.
In that weekend period while I was gone. So, well, on getting out of the canyon on Sunday and back to the plane, I was met by game and fish officers who told me that they did not care that I'd gotten permission. I didn't have it in writing, so they were citing me. It was several $1,000s, and they seized my airplane. Now, I didn't mention it before, but there are a couple of really important facts that I didn't bring up in the last video. And since they've yet to provide me with the body camera footage that I requested from that citation and seizure, you're just gonna have to take my word for it on this. But when they seized the plane, I offered to pay the fines in person at that time so that I could take the airplane and go, but they refused. They also told me that they planned to move the plane to a nearby airport and charge me the costs of transport, and they refused to allow me to move the plane under their escort. Like, they could be in the plane with guns pointed at me, just let me move the plane, please don't try and move it. And finally, they told me there was nothing I could do until the court date, which they set for about 23 days out after the seizure date, and they refused to allow me a sooner court date, even though I requested it. So those are all important, you'll see in a minute. But that brings us to where we are today. On my way to court, hopefully for the last time in my whole godforsaken life. On my way to my second court date, hopefully my final court date. I have my plane, but according to them, it's effectively on loan.
Could I borrow a couple of these?
I've been told that I need to show up to court or they will escalate to a federal case, in which case the FBI takes jurisdiction, they seize the plane again, and then I'd be dealing with a federal court versus the FBI, which is the last thing that I want. So today, I'm really just talking about two people who seized my airplane, who did just about everything they could to make sure I didn't get a fair trial, and they did what they could to charge me as much money as possible to get the plane back, even if that money didn't end up in their pockets. It's a bold accusation, but it isn't conjecture. This is what I was told by people who were directly involved in the planning and the scheming in the background of this event. And I've had a shocking amount of people reach out to me after that last video through email and give me additional information, most of which have asked to remain anonymous. But let me lay out the story and the evidence. On the screen is a notice from the tribal court of their motion to dismiss my attorney from representing me due to violations of their internal rules for attorneys and tribal advocates. Now, they filed this about 2 weeks before my hearing. But when my attorney, Patricia, went to the hearing for this, her charges were dismissed for lack of pretty much anything. There was no evidence or even charges of wrongdoing.
Have you ever had a dream that you could do so?
They filed this specifically against her, relating to my case, with the explicit intent that she couldn't represent me in the case. And it says so in the paperwork. So that didn't stop them after the dismissal, though. They got a little help from the tribe's attorneys after that. They got the police department involved, and they filed charges of lying to the police. And whole different story, but they filed this for something that had occurred about 60 days before. And they refiled the exact same strategy, just with charges this time. And this happened about 2 days before my hearing, but before her hearing, they suspended her from practicing in their court until after her hearing. All of that just to make sure that I wasn't going to be represented in court. And this is an attorney that I chose from their list of approved attorneys because they don't allow outside attorneys without them being approved by the tribe. But Patricia actually stepped up. She found a replacement who was incredibly sharp, another advocate who could help me out, who agreed to represent me on very short notice. Now, going to my hearing is actually like a 340-mile drive around the Grand Canyon. In this case, I had the plane, so we flew over, but we headed to court, and if you remember, at my first hearing, the judge assigned the case to a pro temp judge. Now, this is because my case involved the chair and the vice chair of the tribal council, and these folks appoint the judge. They hire the judge. They are the judge's boss. So, in an effort to be fair, that judge effectively recused herself and appointed an outside judge to hear the case. Now, here's how the court case went from there. The judge had a prior case that went over, which is understandable, but it meant that he showed up about an hour late. Now, when I say showed up, I mean they brought him in on a laptop and set him on a pile of books in the front of the courtroom, which I was a little surprised about. But this guy was a no-nonsense guy. Court started with the judge asking if the tribe had taken the time to review our motion for dismissal, which they said,
Nope.
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 Nope. Nope.
in spite of the fact that we had given it to them that morning, and we'd all just spent an entire hour sitting in the courtroom with absolutely nothing to do. Still, the judge let them review for a while and then gave them a chance to respond, but about a minute into that response, which was the officer just reading the charges against me, the judge cut him off and asked for a response to the dismissal specifically, not the facts of the case, which were already provided to the judge, something he was already familiar with. So our dismissal motion was really based on four things. One, I was given verbal permission from the vice chair of the tribal council, who was authorized to give that permission. They have provisions that allow him to give me permission. Two, the tribal code actually requires me to be given a hearing within 10 days of the citation. My hearing was set for 23 days out from the citation, and I was told it could not be held sooner. Third portion of this is the tribal code requires that I be allowed to bond out and get my seized assets back, which I was not allowed to do even after requesting it. And then the last part is the airport was not closed. It's a private airport, but for an airport to be closed requires very specific filings with the FAA, which were never made. There was no indication from the sky for a pilot to know that that was a closed airport. And truth is, it wasn't closed. Now, the judge asked a few clarifying questions, why the hearing was set so far out, rather than sooner. And the officer just, I say straight up lied. He said he's not a tribal member, so he thought he needed more time, which is false. I specifically asked for a hearing sooner so that I could resolve it more quickly, and I was denied that. So while keeping the motion for dismissal under consideration, the judge called to hear some witness testimony before deciding on that dismissal. He called and swore in Scott Crozier to the stand, but before proceeding with the testimony, the bailiff actually made a suggestion, which I'm super grateful for, and they dismissed all the other witnesses from the room. Proceeding with the testimony, it effectively went exactly as I've outlined. After speaking with Officer Woods, I'd called and spoken with Scott Crozier about the situation. I explained it to him. We agreed upon a fee of $16.27 per day per person, and that game and fish officers were going to meet me in person to fill out the forms and paperwork, collect the fees on Sunday, and Officer Woods confirmed all of that with him. Now, he said he let the game and fish officers know within an hour of my conversation with him about the plan, made them aware of how to proceed, and he wasn't aware of why they proceeded the way that they did.
I mean, that really got out of hand fast.
It jumped up a notch.
It did, didn't it?
Because he made it clear that he had communicated with them. Now, after clarifying a couple of things with the tribe, the judge dismissed Scott after his testimony, thanked him for the help, and he made the following kind of remarks in sequence. First, for the trespassing, which was the first charge, he said, for someone to be guilty of trespassing, there has to be moral guilt. And those were the words he used. The way I interpreted that and the way he explained it is, in order for you to break the law of trespassing, you have to know that you're doing something wrong. You can't do it in ignorance thinking that you're innocent. And because I'd gotten permission from someone who was able and authorized to give me permission, he basically said you can't be held liable as morally guilty for something that you believe you're doing as right, as it pertains to trespassing. And so he dismissed the trespassing charges outright. The second one, for entering an area that requires a special use permit without a special use permit, he confirmed with Scott, who was the vice chair at the time, that he had given me permission and that in his view, he had the authority to give me that permission. And with that permission, from Scott's testimony, those charges were dismissed with prejudice, meaning they couldn't be refiled later. And then the third section was entering an area posted as closed. Now, this is the area he was a little bit iffy on, and he said that. And so he asked some questions about if the airport was on a public or a private road. And the officer said that it was on a private road, which frankly isn't true. It's literally parallel to Indian Road 88, and it is direct access off a public highway to that airport. He then asked if there were any postings of the airport being closed, which he told him there were, but there weren't any postings. There was no indication. Ultimately, he did turn and he gave me a chance to address him. He asked me how long I had been a pilot, which is almost 10 years, and I explained that there were no notices to airmen. There were no X's on the runways, which would be required. Zero indication that that would be a closed airport from the sky. And the argument I made and documented was, for an airport to be closed, it has to be closed from the sky. You can't post it as closed from the ground. It just so happens the airport was also not posted as closed from the ground. I got photos of the entrance. There's no indication, there's no gate, there's no trespassing signs, nothing to show that that's a closed airport. Now, luckily this judge has a home that's near where they're building a new landing strip area. And with that under construction runway, he says, the ends of that runway, each end has these giant X's. They're lit at night. You can see it from the road. You can see it from the sky. And at this point, he asked me what I was hoping to get out of this case. And I responded that my goal was to pay the agreed upon fees that Scott and I had negotiated and discussed, to which he responded, does $75 sound fair? I agreed. He dismissed the third and the final charges, charged me $75.
Your son, being the good guy that he is, did agree with Shelton to pay the trespassing fee. And if it was me, I would have been like, shit.
No way.
Just tell us how it went.
For the record, our co-advocate, our co-pilot, became the pilot. We like pilots. Annette Bravo, she did excellent. It was straight to the point and forward. And Mr. LeBaron, our new buddy, we're going to give him an Indian name right now. And it's going to be Yada Yada. That means fly.
Yada yada.
Yada yada, like a bird flying.
I thought it was because I'm so yappy.
That's gonna be your Wallapai name. We don't
Yada
like
yada.
Indian, but yada
All right.
yada. That's gonna be for you. Nice meeting you guys.
Thank you. Now, the tribe can still refile 2 of these charges against me. And honestly, they probably will after I put out this video. But the judge noted they're going to have a really hard time showing that I had committed the act with moral guilt. That they would have to show up with a burden of proof for the closure and a burden of proof that I did this with moral guilt. And the one charge of entering the area without a special use permit was dismissed with prejudice, meaning it couldn't be refiled against me. So it's important to note that my case relied almost completely on 2 people's testimonies, or at least one of those 2 people's testimonies. Officer Woods, who could corroborate my entire statement, my permission from Scott Crozier, because he went in person that same day and confirmed with Scott that I'd gotten permission, that we were squared away and good to go. And I have that on record in a conversation with him. He'd given me that permission, and Officer Woods confirmed it. And then the other testimony was Scott Crozier's, who showed up, and I'm very grateful, told everything exactly as it occurred. But it was weird to me, because guess who didn't show up to court in spite of being subpoenaed? Actually, not a single officer from the Wallapai Police. I subpoenaed Officer Woods, but the Wallapai Game and Fish Department subpoenaed the Chief of Police as well as 2 other officers, and not one of them showed up to the case that day. And I have no idea why. But before leaving the reservation, I drove to their local post office. I got a money order for the $75 fines, drove back to the courthouse, paid it, and settled everything and got my receipt. And I wasn't in the jury room when this happened, but my dad went with me to the court case, and he heard directly from the chairwoman of the tribal council at the end of all of this. She said, "That's what we get for being nice. We should have kept the plane." Now, it's frustrating, and a few of you have had some things to say on the last video's comment section, and I wanted to stop and clarify a little bit of this, because I've dealt with multiple very kind, very understanding, very helpful people, including one of the officers who had seized my plane. He went out of his way to make sure I got my plane back as quickly as possible, And these were people in the tribe who did everything they could to help me. So I'm a little defensive when such a large number of people are saying just like general statements that are so negative against the tribe or against Native Americans. I know all of the members of the tribe are not like that. I recognize that the tribal system is flawed. In just a couple of days, we got over 500 comments of people sharing similar experiences to me. So if you read some of those stories in that other video's comment section, you'll see I'm not the only one who's dealt with this kind of thing. Over 500 other comments of similar experiences, similar situations, and that's what came in just a couple of days after I posted that video. So I really appreciate the support, and that's the update. We'll see if they refiled the charges. They've still got a little bit of time to do so, and we'll keep you updated from there.